at the top level.
Sure.
And well, anyway, I tried to write this human enhancement program to get funded. And so I had NASA behind me, but at MIT, this was the place where it would be, Letvin, he said no. He was strongly against it. He said, we don't want superhumans. Because I decided then the only possibility was get NASA involved because they could use this skill.
Sure.
But
why didn't he want superhumans, you think?
Well, he says that's like the Nazis. He was strongly influenced by anti-Nazis. And he just felt like...
But then the work on cyborgs, were you ever connected to people doing the cybernetic organisms, Klein, and what was the other fellow's name? You know, it appears also in the late 1960s, funded by, I actually think the Navy and NASA. I mean, all that research on human enhancements through, well, cyborgs, that's the name that they eventually...
I heard about it, but I didn't really know.
Well, it's interesting that they...
So... But anyway, he killed it, so... And I was disappointed. But it was pretty vague, but, you know, when you're starting, it's vague. You can't start at the end. I even didn't have it conceptualized at the end, but it seemed to me, bringing in, for example, people who were blind to teach me, which is what I did.
Yes.
I learned a lot. Fundamental things about humans and biological things. And they learned a lot from me too, but you know, we have the capacity to teach at a much higher level than we do.
And McCulloch was very much fine with participating in U.S. military work and CIA and all that. I
don't think he was. No, I think he was military, yes, but CIA, I don't think so. He was afraid to go to meetings in Moscow. He can't go there because if he goes to a meeting there, there's no telling what they can do.
Well, Wiener went there and was okay. Norbert Wiener went there quite a few times. But he also spoke out against...
Norbert was not a logical guy. He was a genius, but his wife looked after him. And he was not many stories are told about him. Most of them are untrue, perhaps, but...
Mostly on?
Mostly not true, but... he could fall asleep in the lecture and then wake up and continue the sentence. And
no, the reason why I asked this is that, you know, in sometime in the early 1950s, he already starts kind of speaking out again. Oh, that's the myth of the story, that he starts speaking out against the sort of military-industrial complex and starts talking about how automation is going to destroy jobs, and he joins the labor unions and becomes a consultant actually to the labor union and kind of...
Norbert Wiener.
Yeah. And the idea is, I mean, that's the current interpretation of this. The idea is that he somehow drifts to the left while many of the other people, especially people like John von Neumann, you know, end up this supporters of American empire and the military-industrial complex and whatnot. McCulloch doesn't really figure in that story. No. But that's the interpretation that this guy who wrote the history of the Macy conferences, Steve Himes, before that he wrote a book, a joint biography of Wiener and von Neumann. And that's sort of the interpretation that he gives, that Wiener was this nice leftish kind of guy who was afraid of U.S. military after all his work on the radar, and after the war he essentially says that they don't want any military funding, while, you know, people like von Neumann then just say it's fine, we need to win the Cold War. So
yeah, the Cold War was very important, and meant to be you have a negative and a positive that can
people get fed up.
can clean the system so it doesn't have all this noise from people who are interested in their own particular thing.
All right, look, I think I'll go to the bathroom if you don't
You
mind.
do that.
I'll
No,
briefly look
that's-
through those very briefly. I'll just want to take a look what might be in it, and then we can go.
And some is, okay.
And then tomorrow we'll
We'll
get back
continue.
to it.
Yeah, good.
So if you can just show me what the bathroom is.
Ah. I didn't tell you before.
No.
You're holding on to it all the time.
Oh no, no. Sure. Ah, thank you. So I'll start looking through the boxes. Okay, so this is this. just looking through. I don't know if you want to give me a guide or should I just.
Yeah, it's hard.
No. I think I figured out that must be what became your book. It was the collage book, the one that's on the table, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just that. Is it the same text or?
These books sort of.
This seems to be your papers. Many of the papers collected in one.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell.
No, there's.
It was maybe the blind study also.
There's
one.
part of the school.
Uh-huh.
No, what I did is I took all the papers,
Uh-huh.
and at the time I was not in the state of being able to organize it.
Sure.
I just said,
Sure.
the pile, and then I sent one pile to my son and one pile for me, and then there'd be safe.
Sure.
Mostly was so that he has copies,
Yes.
and I kept the copies too.
Uh-huh.
So even there's a little bit of duplication.
So just give me 10 minutes. I'll just go and see what's. Some of them maybe I'll borrow until tomorrow. I'll make pictures of it, and then I'll make that tomorrow. What is this? That's the same. Oh no, this is something else. I think it's the same as
The
this
drafts, let's get a light so we can see.
Yeah, I think it's the same. I was good.
Yeah, I often kept the.
This one just has pictures, and I think those are pictures. Yeah, those are pictures from the book.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
But that book has been added and changed it because it was a little bit too difficult. And.
So I assume it's just a photocopy of the book.
Yeah. But it makes it a little better because I put titles on all the pictures. The book started as a book, and then I met this artist, and between the two of us, we went to Ireland together. It was on my trip to Norway. And the two of us were in Ireland. He was sick actually, he had a cold. And between the two of us, we made all these pictures, which included some very political pictures. Included comparing the song of the Marines, no, not the Marines, the one with Super Marines, who's to the Catholic Church. And
no, I looked through it. I actually took photo. I scanned that book yesterday, so 2 days ago. So I have a digital copy of it.
Yeah. So it ended up being destroyed by the Doubleday.
The book, really?
Yeah, because it's black. You can't read it.
Yes, it's very hard to read.
Yeah, so it's
I've noticed
impossible.
that. Yeah.
And they did what I wanted them to do, which is do like the magazine. You have pictures behind the print. But they did it in such a way that they made it dark.
So one of those I should probably take and scan also to make it easier to read, right? Because
you can't read the book.
No, you can, but it takes a lot of effort, and probably you make interpretations that. Let's see.
No, so this is.
That's also another copy of.
Yeah, so there's a lot of duplication. This has to do with making sure. Let me get you some more pictures.
No, but it's fine. I mean, maybe we'll find something that's.
Well, I put these things here.
That's a tape of sorts. Do you know what's on this tape?
Well, I have a big box of tapes.
But it's they're not marked.
Oh, it might be like that. Yeah.
It's just says Lily. I guess it must be the name of something in Norway. Lily something.
this I wanted to give you
Uh-huh.
to make a copy of it.
Oh, and you were studying Chinese. You didn't tell me about your Chinese story. I'm just stumbling upon some Chinese
Well, I
characters.
spent a year in China
Uh-huh.
teaching the medical engineers about medicine,
Uh-huh.
so that they could join. The biomedical engineering center was being created,
Uh-huh.
and the engineers didn't know anything about medicine, and the medicine people didn't know anything about engineering.
Uh-huh.
So my job was to make the engineers teach them about medicine.
Uh-huh.
So that was kind of fun.
And how did you get that connection?
Through the China Friendship Society.
Uh-huh. I guess that must be some reunion of that CD. That must have to do with your work. And I don't know even what it
What
is.
is it?
55th anniversary of something.
Oh, that's
Yeah, it's probably from your reunion of some class from Toronto, I guess. It's where you studied. Maybe.
I don't know. Let's see. No, it's
from.
their birthday, I think. Wait a minute. No, it's your class. A
Yeah,
medical
yeah,
class.
it's studies. Okay. I'll just put it back in.
Yeah, you can take this one. No. These are some things we.
Uh-huh.
Here's Telling Fish About Water.
The film.
Yeah. The CD.
So I'll try
And
to
here's
get the DVD
my
player
copy of the
tomorrow.
CD
Uh-huh.
from Germany, which is in German.
But you don't have the English one. That's what I.
No, this is in English,
Oh, you do have it.
but it's very bad quality now
Ah.
because it got used so much.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, I'll bring the DVD player tomorrow and we'll see what
Okay.
we can do.
And but
Can I look at just to look at the cover of the DVD, just to sort of get the. Does it have a cover or no? It's just. And it's about the environmental ecology lab. Or,
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And how did the Germans find you?
Avery had a friend.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Since you talk about mechanization a lot, did you meet Siegfried Gideon when he was at MIT, the guy who wrote Mechanization Takes Command? He was a friend of mine.
No, I didn't. No. Here's the Treaty of Talcacoa Bay.
Oh, you do have it.
No,
You do have a copy.
no, wait a minute. I have.
Because I asked Bateson's daughter and she never heard of it.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point.
Uh-huh.
And she didn't want to, daughter, she didn't want to put it in his archives. I don't know. I've got to- There's a lot of repetition because I kept copies of the previous one. Oh. Oh, I know. No, I understand. A discussion between Gregory Brody and Warren Brody on the watershed between ecological and non-ecological thinking in 1972. And what happened was he summarized the meeting. That's my only copy. He summarized the our discussion, but his summary is rather difficult to understand to me. And in fact, I've never seen it before, but it was in my papers. So I was looking and I thought, here is.
But you have your own summary, or no? That's the only thing that's kept.
Yeah, I have the initial summary, which we both made, and it's really the initial one. It isn't clear who spoke and when they say who spoke.
Yeah, I'll just take a picture of it now. Actually, this whole thing. Just to be on the safe side. And John Lilly, did you have contact with him?
John
Lilly, the dolphin guy. John Lilly.
A little bit. He was at the Watershed. He was at the NIH when I was there, and we had one meeting. He wanted me to get into his isolation tank, and at that point, I was afraid I would give away all my secrets, whatever they happen to be. And anyway, I was sort of foolish because I should have done it. But I didn't want to. I hear something that I thought, this is aside from, but I'd sort of like you to take it anyway.
What is this?
This is not relevant to our discussion.
But
it's something that needs to be put somewhere where it is relevant. It's a lecture by Dr. Eldon Bird, U.S. Navy, at the United States Psychotronics Association conference in Atlanta. And it tells about the electronic, the origin of the standards for electronic the decisions about making limits for the electronic limits. It's not making sense. He tells that the Navy actually set up the limits for how much electromagnetic fields should be allowed to be broadcast over larger areas where people are involved. And he points out that it's very dangerous. But he gives a background from the early days of how it all started. With the Navy was trying to communicate with their submarines using enormous radiation to try and get through the water to the submarines. And that this became the basis of the American present time allowed radiation.
Wow.
So it's quite a unique piece.
And where did you find it?
It was given to me in private by somebody who's also involved in this. And he said, you know, this is something that should get out, but I'm not the one to get it out.
So you just have one copy of it?
I have one copy of it.
All right, I'll take a snapshot of that also. I'll just go back to the boxes and we'll.
Yeah, you do that.
But it sounds very interesting.
It's just that I want you can take the whole thing as far as I'm concerned. I don't need to be involved in it.
Let's see. That's the article I showed you. Your article on soft architecture. Remember? That's the article we were looking at earlier today. The soft architecture. Your article.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with Radical Software and that entire video activism crowd? Paul Ryan and those people. Did you meet Paul? You knew Paul Ryan, or?
Yeah. Paul did part of the. He was at the quarry with us.
Yeah, the quarry is something you need to tell me more about. Also, I mean, it was more like a commune, or what was it like?
It wasn't
like a colony of artists, or.
Yeah, Corey was, Avery was a very rich guy
From the Palmolive.
from the family.
Yeah.
His money was from Remington Rand, I think.
From?
Remington Rand.
Uh-huh.
You know Remington Rand? That's they made the rifles.
Yeah. Well, the story that ran everywhere in the newspapers after he died was that the money was from the Palmolive, the soap.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Uh-huh. And, uh-huh.
And Remington Rand was, the soap. But I'm not sure, but Remington Rand may have been somewhere in there too.
Uh-huh.
I won't stand against anything else.
Uh-huh. So he got that quarry for himself, or that was family's?
No, he bought it.
He bought it. Uh-huh.
And he saw the potentials of it.
Uh-huh.
It was filled with water on it. You'll see it in the film, in the DVD.
Yes. There are no very beautiful photos of it taken by whoever lives there now. So I found them online, the pictures. Actually colored, very, very nice, looking very nice.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
Whoever married, anyway, somebody connected to that place. Uh-huh. So he bought it, and so people, how many people lived there?
Well, he built a big house on the one side of it,
Yes.
which was his house, and it was a very luxurious place, but made of stone and then I lived in a cabin some of the time, but mostly I lived in a little hut on the other side of that. And then I lived in the garage. And so you see, my role is quite different than his. And that's all there was. So it wasn't a lot of people. And
but when they say Paul Ryan was there, he would come and visit, or
he lived there a little while, I think. And Paul was a friend, and hung out with us some of the time, and we were building plastic houses, let me say it right, membrane structures, and then I built a house made of foam.
Yes.
And that house was quite a unique place. And it was urethane foam house, which when I was a purist at that point and didn't put, as you should have put, branches inside the urethane foam. So it was just urethane foam. It wasn't very strong, but it was very warm inside, I can say. And the shape was really fun. And but when my dog would jump from the top roof down to the second roof layer, he went through. So I had to put a window there. I've got to be expert at putting in windows. But I lived there for a few years. And 2 or 3. And it was quite a fascinating place, but we had visitors coming.
Sure.
And it was what replaced having the EEL lab. And so when we left the EEL lab, we moved up to Avery's place. And there we did some technical work, but not so much. But it was kind of dramatic what we did. We started making things that were like. It was the beginning of my whole, or I should say, the end of my whole program with making materials that could expand and contract and change color on as a function of computer commands. So I have a patent on all sorts of uses of plastic to membranes to
That's the soft materials.
soft materials, yeah. And I worked hard at that to get the and so that I have 3 patents, and the third one is on touch. They were expensive.
Can I ask you, with Paul Ryan, did you connect over McLuhan at all? Because he was his assistant, as you probably know, at Fordham. That he was very close to McLuhan.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, he was his assistant when McLuhan was at Fordham in 1967. He
Was
sat
where?
2 doors down from McLuhan. Fordham University in New York. You know McLuhan?
Fordham.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
McLuhan
yeah.
spent a year there, and Paul Ryan became his assistant.
I didn't know that at all. That's
So his turn from McLuhan to cybernetics was partly because he said he found it very hard to operationalize McLuhan's ideas in practice, and this is where he discovered Bateson and you, because he says he met you and, well, Bateson for sure for the first time he met in 1970 at a conference in Princeton, October 1970. I think it was on urban planning.
It was.
There was this big anthropological foundation that put it together, Van Grunen or whatever the name of that foundation is, 1970 in Princeton. Do you remember? A conference which had a lot of these video guys come in with cameras, and they would interview like Bateson, and they would record it, and you don't remember it.
Yeah.
Remember it?
But that's one of the most exciting things I ever did in my life. Because at that conference, I was involved with the fact that, these conferences, I would go to conferences and make trouble.
Yes. I know that you made trouble at the cybernetics conference once when you tried to provide feedback on stage with Avery Johnson.
Yeah, exactly. That was fun. And of course at the time my heart was beating like hell. And I did it at another...
Just I'm pointing that out.
Huh?
It's an IBM folder. Your stuff is an IBM folder.
Oh yeah. Well, that was the conference. That was. I was complaining that let's not make a square table or an oblong table.
They moved the tables. I remember he mentioned that.
We moved it, and when they wouldn't change it. I simply saw that the big table was made of small tables. So I pulled out the small table in front of me, and I said, I'm not living in your world. I'm living in another world, and I'm going to have my own shape. So that went fine. The first day went fine, and they accepted that. But I kept the between me and Paul, I guess. We kept moving the TV cameras around, so the conference was on the amount of noise.
Was it in urban planning and the city?
Huh?
Did it have to do with the city and urban planning?
No, that's another one. That's on the tape. No, it had to do with the one I'm thinking of. Was what's the Jewish university in
Massachusetts?
Boston. Yeah.
Brandeis?
Brandeis.
I don't know about the Brandeis one, but I'm sure.
No, but anyway, at this conference, I moved the tables around, and we ended up having the tables on end, so that the board was vertical.
Uh-huh.
And then crawling in a cave we made with the green covers
Uh-huh.
for the tables, the original green covers. And we had to talk to each other from those caves.
Uh-huh.
And it was about, basically, this was exactly on the title, you know.
Uh-huh.
It was quite relevant. It wasn't foolishness.
Uh-huh.
It had to do with the amount of how do you maintain your senses when so much noise is all around you.
Uh-huh.
So we made all the noise around me,
Uh-huh.
and then we changed the structures so that we didn't have the old structures, which was my way of saying, you know, hey guys, you have killed everything already with your right angles. And I don't know if we have or should have another tape, which was a talk to graphic artists, and where it's a beautiful experience. Good, you know, we were hippies at that time, and we wore hippie clothes, and we. I don't know, let me catch it. Yeah, anyway. So, the man who was running it, that conference we were talking about, was, you know, absolutely confounded by what we were doing. The guy who would put up the money, because he couldn't understand how this related to the subject of how do you maintain things in order when there's so much going on. And it ended up with my saying to this man who was trying to maintain the orderly way of having a conference, I said to him, today I am not going to say anything at all, but I am going to wear a heartbeat analyzer, which will make a noise, and when my heart rate goes over such and such number, and so I didn't say anything, but when they'd made something I was strongly against, to go bong 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 bong. That was so funny, and the consternation was enormous. There's things I did that were.
And at that conference on cybernetics, where you kind of got on stage and wanted to make it more interactive and to generate feedback, how was it received by McCulloch and those
No,
other guys?
McCulloch and the one at the.
It was the first Congress, Cybernetics Congress, something like that.
Yeah.
The annual meeting.
He didn't like it.
He didn't.
No, and nobody liked it. Of the official guys. So I would say outcast. Except that I wasn't. Because as I recall.
And what's the idea of urban planning and sort of cities trying to grapple with all of the changes that were happening in the 60s and 70s a big kind of scene for you, like for your group? Because I mean, I suspect that some of the work you were doing on architecture and space also had to deal with the fact that there was a lot of opposition to planners as
No, actually,
So how can you keep cities flexible as they keep growing? I mean, was it the same at all, or like this concern was?
that's on the tape too. Uh,
And the tape you're talking about is the documentary, or it's
yeah, the
some other tape?
documentary. Yeah, but it's with Nicholas Negroponte. There was also one of his teachers, whose name I don't remember, who got accepted as an important person because he said the city needs to have landmarks.
Yeah, Kevin Lynch.
Kevin Lynch.
Yeah.
Jesus, you're good.
Well, he's a big guy.
So he's the guy who got the job for me with the school.
So Kevin Lynch, you knew Kevin Lynch?
Yeah.
He got you at the School of Architecture, or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and the school that I took over for 2 years.
Because his big idea was cognitive mapping, the ability to map the city in your head.
Yeah, exactly.
Cognitive mapping, it then became a big scene.
You know, I was a part of that because I was taking, you know, having worked with the blind, I was taking Nicholas around on a wheelchair around the city.
Nicholas Negroponte.
Yeah.
You were taking him on a wheelchair around Boston.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, he had blindfolds on. So we were working on what is the sound city like, where you don't see it but you only hear it. You'd be a blind man. So Nicholas was the blind man on the wheelchair being taken around to perceive the city as it seems to a blind man, and also to perceive the city from another point of view. And at the same time, this was part of my educating Nicholas. At the same time, Kevin Lynch, I think, was sort of trying to think about. They were talking to each other, as far as I know. So I may have had something to do with that too.
Sure.
But I don't know. I'm exaggerating. I don't need to exaggerate anymore.
Okay. But no, Kevin Lynch then, he eventually then wrote the book, What Time Is This Place? It's a book he published, I think, in the 60s or 70s, where he actually tried to connect space and time and cities. But his famous one, I think, was The Image of the City. Oh, that's But he's now read a lot in the outside of architecture, because this famous Marxist literary critic, Frederick Jameson, in 1980 or something like that, he took the idea of cognitive mapping and basically said that right now capitalism operates by preventing our ability to even map out what causes what. And he basically said that cognitive mapping is precisely our inability to map how things work is one of the signs of alienation under late capitalism.
Well, the alienation is pretty fucking complete at this point, I must say. And the computer has really done it in large measure.
So you think that the computer was mostly it was not an emancipatory gesture that you thought it would be. It was mostly a force of conservatism and
It absorbed, as you say in your article, it absorbed people into this other world, which is not a world of action. A world of consuming ideas too, but not finding, not really acting in the old way anyway. They got a new way of acting.
But back in your sort of cybernetic days, wasn't it all about sort of growing the number of ideas, and it would kind of fit within the Batesonian kind of paradigm that we need to produce knowledge and ideas and instantiate it into some kind of physical objects, and the more ideas, the better? I mean, was there ever a critique of consumption anywhere within the cybernetic circles you were in, or? I see it in the radical software articles. So within those kind of hippie countercultural materials, it shines through, but it's not really a dominant theme, no.
No, it didn't. It was stayed in a small group.
Oh, this is spatial. What is this doing here? I know exactly what it is. That's the spatial data brochure that Negroponte's colleague wrote to apply for money from DARPA. Maybe you can remember what it is, because it's a pretty important to remember what it is. It's Bolt, I think is his name. Dick Bolt.
Dick Bolt.
Yeah, I think he wrote it, because I was looking at it recently, and it's a description of what they were doing at the Media Lab, at the Architecture Machine Group at that time, and they were applying. I'm just as curious, what is it doing in your files, because it's way after 1972.
Well, in the first place, I wouldn't say I'm the first one. It would be not nice. But I suggested to Nick that we make a chair. And on the chair would be these, the fingertips, and we could put information into the person sitting in the chair.
Yes.
About what was going on the screen.
Yes.
So it would be right that what was going on the screen was changed by what the guy did with his fingers.
Yes.
But that wasn't possible at the time. But there was something simple you could do. That is, with his fingers, he could be making, moving a mouse or moving a complicated.
So what then became the Sketchpad were involved with that? With Ivan Sutherland were doing Sketchpad?
It wasn't Sketchpad. It was actually you see a movie of something, and then you can add to it, or you could. What it became in my mind, anyway, in the end, because I realized it was being misused. It was they were building this. They built this chair that I wanted, and I helped them to conceptualize. But they were using it to find people who were active against the government.
Yes, yes.
And then they could, that person would be outlined in some color.
Yes, because it was funded also by the military and the, yes.
Exactly. And so that they used it for military, and this was not what I had intended at all.
Are we still talking about the early 1970s, or are we already talking about late 1970s? We're already out of America at the time.
No.
You were still there?
I was there.
So it's still Architecture Machine Group, early 1970s?
Yeah, it was, I don't think it was early 1970s. It was when I was with McCullough.
So late 1960s?
And, in the late, yeah.
So eventually it becomes, in the Architecture Machine Group, it becomes what Negroponte would call data land and data space. They came up with these terms. And the chair is there, and they wanted to set up a separate room, which they did, where you could come, sit in front of a giant screen and manipulate data. So
well, this was not to manipulate data.
But you could manipulate data with a screen.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
It was a
that
touch.
was an idea that basically I had and provided him with.
And it came out of your work on human enhancement and the perception, or
perception and my conception that that we could make an interactive screen.
Yes.
Interactive presentation of information, which then you could or reorganize, or you could. But I wasn't thinking of numbers. I was thinking more of. You could change what went on the screen. I remember that very well.
Well, it's 1979, so this is what's like puzzling me. That this is
but that's what came later.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But we're Nick, and I never really talked to. Well, I did talk to the man. What's his name? The one who's
Dick Bolt?
Dick Bolt.
Yeah.
But I worked for them
Uh-huh.
as consultant.
Yeah. After.
No.
Still.
While I was at MIT.
Because eventually they also did this project called Aspen Movie Map, and they basically sent a bunch of cars to Aspen, Colorado, and they shot on video and photo every single street and every single corner in Aspen, and then made it navigable, so you could go and touch the screen and navigate the streets of Aspen, and it was late 1970s. So they essentially did what Google did with Google Earth, but they did it already in late 1970s.
Yeah.
And I think Bolt and a few others were involved in this.
Yeah, well, I was not involved. It's when I left.
Yeah.
I was.
But this is what to me is so interesting. It's this idea of integrating space and interactivity. Because ultimately, I think the origins of cyberspace, they have to do with that, and it's sort of in the this transition from architecture machine group to the media lab, that kind of marks the transition from cyberspace as a concept that still had its origins in, well, partly counterculture and some of this much more radical work that you were doing, towards something much more commercial and that governments would want to do to control populations.
Yeah, well, we were doing the seed work. You know, we were not thinking of that at all.
Yeah, sure.
The whole well, I will call it hippie, the counterculture movement was bought. You know, here they made it to something popular. I went to one. I got invited to write something for a group, and I think it was California, and we were going there anyway because Avery and I were giving a talk to the students at this university not University of California, but another one.
Stanford?
No, one that's less known. There's a third one that's also a big university.
Caltech?
Might have been Caltech, but I think there's still another one. May have been Caltech, but it's more like the big universities, but it's less.
It's in San Francisco area, or it's in LA, or
it's in
San Francisco.
Yeah. No. Let me think.
Berkeley's the University of California, so.
Yeah, it's.
So you gave a talk there?
Well, we didn't do so much talking.
So what did you do there? You went there?
We went and we talked about space, and we put the students. We did this at Yale. At Yale, we started this architect thing with. No, it was at the university. At the Yale, we did this talk to architects and designers, which we presented a tape. And on this tape, we showed pictures of designing schools and things like that in ordinary square buildings. So, and we made it so that it was very square and ordinary, like the architects and the designers are used to.
Sure.
And then we were all dressed. We were both of us in hippie clothes, and it was really funny because then we turned the lights out in this conference room, And then we started to play, oh gosh, Mother of Invention or Mother of something, one of these real wild counterculture songs. And then we started with, this square with a computer, we could make it into an angle. And so we started showing them that they could build these buildings with using all sorts of angles. So that the building was at a triangle or something else.
Sure.
And because that was quite new idea. And then we showed that you could